Thank you. And now I proudly present Bianca Reese, my future wife.
Thank you all so much.
His promotion night was perfect until he pulled his mistress close and named her the future Mrs. His father toasted, his sister beamed. None of them knew the woman he called worthless signed every paycheck in that room. Her old year's salary barely covered that ring. Then the screen lit. If you've ever been made small by the very people who owed you everything, stay with me. What this woman does with one signature will sit in your chest long after this story ends. Follow along and don't look away before the light comes up behind him. The city was Atlanta, and the tower belonged to Halcyon Group, though almost none of the people crowded into its glass lobby that night could have told you who it truly belonged to. They knew the marble floors. They knew the tall windows that turned the whole skyline gold at dusk. They knew the checks came on time, every other Friday, without fail, for years. They believed the company ran itself, the way water runs downhill, and not one of them ever asked whose hand held it back from the edge. 300 of them stood beneath a wide, dark panel of glass that hung over the stage, drinks in hand, waiting for the honors to begin. This was the night Halcyon lifted people up. Promotions were read aloud, names were called, careers turned. And the name everyone had come to hear that year was Andre Whitefield, the man about to be handed the title of vice president. Look at the woman by the back wall. Gray dress, flat shoes, a small clutch held tight in both hands. Remember her. Everything glittering in that room was standing on ground she had quietly laid. Her name was Simone. To the people brushing past her to reach the shrimp and the free wine, she was nobody. The wife who worked nights, the one Andre only mentioned when he needed a laugh at a dinner. She had let it stay that way for years. Truth be told, she had let a lot of things stay that way. The night opened slow. A manager read the smaller promotions first, and people clapped politely and checked their phones. A young woman from accounts was moved up to team lead, and her mother cried in the third row, and Simone watched that mother cry and felt something old move in her chest, because she knew that raise had crossed her desk 2 weeks before, and she had approved it herself and never said a word to a soul. Then the lights tightened onto center stage, and Andre stepped into them. He wore a suit that fit him like it was proud of him. He was a handsome man, and he knew it, and he had learned young that a good smile could open doors a good name could not. He tapped the microphone twice. The whole room hushed the way a room only hushes for a man it has already decided to love. 10 years ago, he said, I walked into this company with nothing but nerve and a borrowed tie. Tonight, they hand me the top floor. The room clapped. He drank it in, let it wash over him, waited for it to peak. Then his eyes drifted to the back wall, found his wife standing quiet in the gray dress, and something small and mean in him could not resist the opening. Now, some of you have asked about my wife, he said, and a few people laughed before they even understood why. She's back there somewhere. She works nights, cleaning, mopping. Honest work, don't get me wrong. Sweet woman. He let the pause land. But let's be real, she was never built for a room like this. The laughter came easy and cruel, the way laughter does when the powerful man in the light gives a crowd permission to look down on someone in the dark. A few people turned to find her, to enjoy her face. Simone did not give them the face they wanted. She kept her hands folded over the small clutch, and inside it, though no one in that lobby could have guessed, rested an old fountain pen that once belonged to her father. From the front row came a second voice, older, sharper, pleased with itself. Gloria Whitefield, Andre's mother, in a rope of pearls she wore like armor. She turned in her seat so the rows behind her could catch every word. Finally, a woman who fits the name. Because now on Andre's arm came the other one, Bianca Reese, 30, sharp-eyed, hungry in a way she learned to hide behind a beautiful smile. A mid-level analyst from 2 floors down, who'd spent 6 careful months making Andre feel like the biggest man in any building he walked into. She stepped into the light like she'd been born standing in it. She found Simone at the back, held her eyes for one deliberate second, and then looked straight through her, the way a person looks through an empty chair.
"Hi, sweetheart," Bianca called out toward the back wall, sugar over ice. "Don't wait up." The room roared. Andre laughed hardest of all. His father, Wendell, surged half out of his seat with a glass already raised. His sister, Cheryl, standing near the aisle, gave the nervous kind of smile a person gives when they don't want to be the one who ruins a party, but her eyes had already slipped past the stage, back towards Simone, and there was something sick and uneasy climbing up her throat. Simone watched her husband present another woman to a room full of her own employees on a stage inside a building she owned, and she did not cry. She did not leave. She simply pressed her thumb once against the fabric of the clutch, feeling the shape of it underneath, the way a person touches a scar to be sure it's still there. Here is what the room missed, because the room was busy laughing. Near the double doors, a broad man in a dark jacket, Halcyon's head of security, a man named Ray who had worked for the company 11 years, straightened his back the instant Simone shifted her weight, as if a bell only he could hear had rung somewhere. A server carrying an empty glasses dipped his head as he passed her and murmured, low, "Evening, ma'am," in a voice weighted with respect that would have looked strange to anyone paying attention. Nobody was paying attention. Every eye in the lobby was on the beautiful couple in the light. Andre leaned into the microphone one last time before the formal citation was read. "To new beginnings," he said, and turned and kissed Bianca on the cheek, slow for the crowd. Simone turned toward the corridor that ran behind the lobby. She was not running, she had somewhere to be, and it was not in that light, not yet. Every person in that room worked for a name they had never once signed a check. Within the hour, they would learn whose hand had been holding the ink all along. To understand the woman in the gray dress, you have to leave the tower and drive an hour south, back through the years to a small Georgia town where the streets go quiet after 7, and the sky does most of the talking. Her father was Silas Ellison, and he ran a 2-man print shop out of a building that used to be a feed store. He printed church bulletins, funeral programs, wedding invitations, graduation cards, the birth announcements for half the county's babies. He was a slow, gentle, deliberate man, and he signed every invoice by hand, careful as a prayer, with a black fountain pen he kept clipped in his breast pocket, the way some men keep a watch. Simone grew up in the smell of ink and warm paper and machine oil. She was a soft child, the kind who bandaged stray dogs behind the shop and cried for a week when the county truck came to take them. The kind who gave her lunch away twice a week to a boy who had none, then told her mother she wasn't hungry so she'd never have to explain. Her father saw all of it and never once told her to harden up. He told her instead that the soft ones can survive too. They just have to learn to survive smarter than the rest. There was a hard winter the shop nearly folded. A big automated printer opened out by the highway, faster and cheaper, and the orders thinned to none. She was 17. She came in one night after school to find her father sitting alone at the counter, the register light humming over him, the ledger open to a page full of red. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man deciding something. He took the pen from his pocket. He folded it in her hand, one by one. A signature isn't ink, baby. It's a promise you can carry people with. When you sign your name on a man's paper, you're telling him you'll stand behind him, come what may. So you never sign what you won't stand behind, and you never, ever let a loud man make you forget that your name is worth more than his noise. She held the pen her father gave her like it might break in her hand. She did not fully understand him yet. She would. He was gone before she turned 20. His heart on an ordinary Tuesday, somewhere between 2 orders. The shop closed. The debts, of course, did not. And Simone learned the second half of her father's lesson the hardest way there is.
that the world does not slow down for a grieving girl, and that a young woman with a soft face and empty pockets gets circled by people who can smell both. She did not fold. She took a job cleaning offices at night because night work paid a few dollars more an hour and asked fewer questions of a girl with no diploma on the wall. And in the daytime, when the rest of the world slept, she taught herself the thing her father had never had the time to learn: how the money actually moves, how a contract is really won, how a small, invisible nobody becomes a name carved into the glass of a downtown tower. It took 15 years, and it started with a single salvaged contract that 3 bigger firms had already walked away from. A maintenance and power deal for a rundown grid of city buildings that everyone agreed wasn't worth the headache. Simone read every page those other firms hadn't bothered to read. She found the money hiding in the boring parts. She made it worth the headache. That one salvaged deal became 2, then a department, then a company with a real name on the door, and the name was Halcyon Group. By the night of the honors, that single salvaged deal had grown into a business that met payroll for more than 400 families every single month. More money moving quietly through her steady hands in a week than her father's little shop had seen across 30 years of Sundays. She had done it without a headline, without a photograph, without a soul in that tower ever learning her face. Because she kept her father's rule, and one of her own on top of it. She stood behind every name on her payroll like it was family. And she stayed out of the light entirely. She had watched what visibility cost her father: the circling men, the smiling debtors, the people who came close only to take. And she decided the safest place to build a real thing was in the dark, behind a quiet holding company and a title so plain it disappeared. To the staff, the owner was only ever the chair, a signature at the bottom of a document, a person they assumed lived somewhere far away in a house they'd never see, who signed the checks and never ever came down to the floor. She married Andre in the middle of all of it. Back then he was charming and broke, and she believed honest about being both, and that honesty was the thing she fell for. She never told him what she was building, not out of secrecy, not at first, out of the old habit, the old fear, that the moment people learn what you have, they stop seeing what you are. So she kept her father's gift in a drawer and her name out of the light, and she told herself a good man would never need to know his wife was more than she seemed. She would find out exactly how wrong she was in her own kitchen on a Thursday, with her father's pen rolling across the cold tile floor. By the last year of the marriage, Andre had stopped bothering to pretend he was happy. The problem was never the money, and never Simone's plain face, and never anything a woman could fix by trying harder. The problem was older than her, and it lived in him. Andre had grown up the poor cousin at every family table, the boy in the handed-down coat, the one whose plate got filled last. Somewhere back in all that shame, he decided that a man is only as big as the room believes him to be. He needed to be the provider. He needed to walk into a place and feel the lights turn toward him. And a quiet wife who never seemed to need him for anything, who disappeared into work she wouldn't explain and came home after midnight without apology, made him feel small in a way he could not name and would never forgive. Bianca made him feel enormous. That was her entire gift, and she gave it with skill. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She leaned on his arm like it was the only strong thing in the room. She told him over and over that he was wasted on a woman who mopped floors for a living. Bianca had grown up hungry too, in a house where the lights got shut off more than once, and she made a cold, clear-eyed calculation. Andre's rise to vice president was the closest thing to solid ground she was ever likely to be offered. And she wasn't a monster. She was frightened. Frightened the way people get when they've counted every last dollar in a drawer and come up short. Together, Andre and his mother built a story, because a story is how ordinary people talk themselves into cruelty. In their story, Simone was the one hiding something. All those late hours, that stubborn silence about her work, it had to be another man. Gloria whispered it first, because Gloria had never believed her son should have married a plain girl from a print shop town. And a whisper gave her permission to finally say out loud the things she'd felt for years.
"You think a grown woman vanishes every night for honest reasons?" Gloria said, setting down her forks till the words could carry. "Open your eyes, son. That woman is making a fool of you in front of everybody." Andre chose to believe it, not because it was true. Some part of him surely knew it wasn't.
He believed it because it was useful. If Simone was the liar, then he was the wronged man, and a wronged man gets to feel righteous about whatever he does next. So he started pushing. First it was the house. He wanted it put into his name alone, to protect the family, he said, holding her hand while he said it. Then it was her mouth. She had to stop telling people she worked nights because it embarrassed him at his level now. He wanted her smaller, quieter, gone in every way but the one the law could see. And he told himself she would never fight any of it because a woman like that had nothing to fight with. There was a night he laid the deed to the house on the kitchen table and slid it toward her with 2 fingers, a cheap ballpoint resting on top. "Just sign it, Simone," he said. "You'll still live here. It's just paperwork. It's about respect." She looked at the deed for a long time, and here is the thing that should tell you how deep the hurt had gone. She almost signed it. She, who quietly held the ink behind 400 families, sat at her own table and nearly signed her own house away to a man who was already planning his exit, because some tired 17-year-old part of her had started to believe him when he said she was nothing. That is the true cruelty of it. The strong ones don't scream when they break. They bleed quiet, in kitchens where nobody claps. She did not sign it that night. She said she'd think about it, and Andre took that as a win, and he left the deed on the counter like a flag he'd planted. Then came the Thursday. She came home early, which she almost never did, her head aching from a day of board calls no one in her life knew she took. She heard his voice through the half-open door of the study, low and easy and warm, warmer than he'd been with her in a year, and he didn't know she was in the house. Andre said, "Once I've got the title, I'm done with her. I promise you. She's got nothing without me anyway. Nothing." A pause. A soft, ugly laugh. "You'll see. Next week I make VP. After that, it's just you and me. She can keep her mop." Simone stood in the dark hallway of her own home and felt the floor go soft under her. She did not slam the door. She did not scream his name. She walked very slowly into the kitchen, and she sat down on the cold tile, and the clutch slid from her lap and fell open beside her. Her father's fountain pen rolled out of it, across the floor, and came to rest against the leg of a chair. She looked at it lying there, and could not make her hand reach out and pick it up. If you have ever been made to feel like nothing by the exact person who owed you everything, then you already know the sound of that kitchen. There was no crying in it. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, and a woman going numb in the one place on earth she'd thought was safe. How long does a person sit like that? Long enough for the light in the window to slide from gold to gray to gone. Long enough to hear, underneath the hum, her father's voice from 20 years back, the line about a name being worth more than a loud man's noise. And slowly, on the floor, Simone reached out and closed her fingers around it the same way she had at 17, one at a time, and something in her chest went from broken to quiet. Quiet was far worse for the people who did this to her, because quiet is where the real decisions get made. She stood up off that floor. She wiped the nib clean on her sleeve and clipped it shut. She took out her phone, and for the first time in 15 years, she made a single call and arranged one small thing, a seat in the front row at the honors, and a word with the man who ran the sound in the screens. She had spent all those years keeping her name out of the light on purpose. The next night, she was going to let it burn. The lobby was fuller than it had been the year before. Word had gotten around that Andre Whitefield would be made vice president, and people love to watch a man rise, especially a man who looks like he was carved for it. The wide, dark panel of glass hung waiting over the stage. Waiters wove through the crowd. Wendell had his glass full and ready before anyone had asked him to raise it. This time, Simone did not stand at the back. She walked in through the main doors in a deep black dress, plain still, but cut clean, cut like a decision, and she took a seat in the front row where the family sat, right at the center of the light. Gloria's mouth pinched tight when she saw her. Cheryl blinked, surprised, and without knowing why, shifted an inch closer to her sister-in-law than to her own mother. Andre climbed the steps to the stage, He didn't see his wife until he was already talking, and when he found her sitting there in the front row, his easy smile flickered once, then set hard. Fine, he thought. Let her watch. Let her see exactly what she threw away. 10 years I gave this company, he began, warming to it. And tonight isn't only about a title. It's about the woman right here beside me, the one who believed in the man I really am when others only saw a mop and a night shift. He put out his hand. Bianca rose from the second row and climbed the 3 steps into the light, and the crowd made the soft, thrilled sound a crowd makes when it thinks it's watching a love story bloom in real time. Andre pulled her against his side. He looked out over 300 of his own co-workers. He looked down at his wife in the front row, and he said the line he had been saving all week. "Everybody," he said, "let me introduce the future Mrs. Whitfield." Wendell was on his feet before the sentence finished, glass high. "To Andre," he boomed. Gloria clapped with her chin lifted, vindicated at last, and Cheryl, caught between 300 watching faces and the sickness rising in her own stomach, let a small, helpless smile pull at her mouth, because in that frozen second she did not know what else on earth to do with her face. Simone did not stand. She lifted one hand, just barely, off her lap, a small, calm motion, the kind you'd use to signal a waiter. At the back of the room, Ray touched his ear and said a single word into it. The wall of glass behind Andre came alive. It did not show a slideshow. It did not show the company logo. It showed a face, her face, live from a camera near the front row, thrown 20 feet across the dark glass. Simone, calm, looking straight ahead into the room. White letters wrote themselves beneath the image, one clean line at a time. A word from the chair. And then smaller, final, the thing none of them had ever seen spelled out. Owner, Halcyon Group. The room did not gasp all at once. It came in a wave, rolling front to back as one person after another did the math. The chair. The owner nobody had ever laid eyes on, the name at the bottom of every check every one of them had ever cashed. It was the night shift wife. It was the woman in the front row that the man on stage had just called nothing. Andre turned toward the enormous image of his wife. His mouth came open. No sound came out of it. Simone stood then, unhurried, and the whole room's silence parted to let her through. She climbed the 3 steps into the light. Bianca stepped back from Andre without being told, some animal part of her already understanding. Simone crossed the stage, took the microphone gently from her husband's slack hand, and turned to face the people who worked for her. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was level. It did not shake at all. "Every honor handed out in this building tonight, I approved. Every raise, every promotion. A single breath, including his." Then she turned to Andre. She spoke to him quietly, close, so the microphone barely caught it, yet in that dead silent room every soul heard. "You told them I was never built for this room. Andre, I built the room." He scrambled for anything. "Simone, baby, listen, I can explain this whole thing. It's not—" "You told a woman on the phone I had nothing without you." She reached into the small clutch and drew out a single folded page, his promotion letter, the vice president appointment, the thing he had chased and schemed and betrayed for across 10 long years. She laid it flat on the podium and smoothed it once with her palm. "This raise you were so proud of, a number it would have taken my father 10 years of print jobs to earn. I approve one just like it every Friday with the flick of my hand. I never once feel it leave my hand." She looked up into his face. "Yours turned out to be the easiest name I ever stopped signing."
She drew her father's fountain pen from the clutch, the black one, the promise you carry people with, and uncapped it. For exactly 1 second her hand shook, because she knew, better than anyone alive, what it was for. Her father had put it in her hand to lift people up, to stand behind them.
In 15 years, she had never once used it to bring a man down, and she understood, in that shaking second, that if she pressed the nib to this page, some soft thing her father had spent 17 years keeping alive in her would close for good and never open again. She signed it anyway. Not the promotion, the line beneath it, where the company's lawyers had drawn up the other document that morning, the termination, ending Andre Whitefield's employment at Halcyon Group, effective immediately. Her real name, in her father's ink, thrown 20 feet tall across the glass for 300 people to read out slow. She capped it. The shake was gone from her hand. So was something else, and she felt it go. You're free to leave, Andre. You wanted to be a big man in a big room, so look around you. Right now, you are the smallest thing in it. She did not smile when she said it. There was no triumph anywhere on her face. She had won completely, and it had cost her the last warm corner of a heart her father had spent 17 years keeping alive in her, would close for good and never open again. She stepped back from the microphone. The image behind her went dark. Her face vanished from the glass, and only the woman was left standing in the light, holding an old pen, paying the price of the thing she'd just done. What happens to a man after a whole room learns that his name was never the one that mattered? For a while, it looked like nothing, and then it turned out to be everything. Andre Whitefield walked out of that tower and into a city where his story had already arrived ahead of him. Halcyon let him go clean with the paperwork in order, but a firing that plays out 20 feet tall on a wall of glass does not stay politely inside one building. It travels. The doors he'd always opened with a smile stayed shut now. Old contacts stopped returning him. He had spent 10 years learning how to be the man in the light, and had never once learned how to be anything at all in the dark. And now, the dark was the only room he had left. He went looking for a reference in the end. Weeks later, humbled, he sent word asking Simone for a one-line on company paper saying he'd been a decent worker so he could start over somewhere small. She did not answer with cruelty. She simply did not answer. Some silences say everything a signature could. Bianca did the arithmetic inside of a month. There was no title anymore. No vice president's salary, no solid ground under her feet, just a man sleeping on a cousin's couch and calling her too many times a day. She didn't scream at him or curse him out, she just stopped picking up, the same way she'd once looked straight through Simone at the back of a room. Her fear had never once loved him, it had only ever let her use him as a wall to stand between herself and the poverty she'd crawled out of. And a broken man makes a poor wall. She put in for a transfer to a branch across town and left quietly. Here is the part that surprised everyone, including Bianca herself. Simone did not fire her. She could have, with a sentence, and no one would have blamed her. But Simone had sat too long on a cold kitchen floor feeling like nothing, to go and build her own throne out of the wreckage of another frightened woman. So Bianca kept her job, and lost her name in the hallways instead. Every colleague on every floor now knew exactly what she'd reached for and exactly how she'd missed, and she carried that shame from meeting to meeting, like a coat she could not take off in any weather. It wasn't a clean fall. It was a slow one, earned. And it was not gentle to watch. Cheryl was the one who broke in the right direction. 3 days after the honors at a family dinner thick and heavy with silence, she stood up from her chair, her hands shaking, and she told the truth out loud to the whole table, that her brother had lied, that her mother had helped him build the lie brick by brick, and that Simone had spent all these years working herself half to death and being worth more than every person in that room combined. It cost her plenty. Her mother didn't speak to her for months. But Cheryl drove out to Simone's door anyway, stood on the step with her eyes running over, and said, "I smiled on that stage. I smiled, and I'll be sorry for it every day I live." And Simone opened the door and let her in. Not everything that gets broken can be fixed. But some things, if you're willing, can be started again from the beginning. Gloria was another matter. And this is where the story refuses to tie itself up neat, the way real life always refuses. Gloria lost not one thing. She kept her pearls and her comfortable little house, which had never once depended on her son to begin with. She never apologized, not to Simone, not to her own daughter, not one time. Worse than that, she went right on the offensive with the only weapon she had left, which was her mouth. She told the aunts and the church ladies and every neighbor who'd lean over a fence that Simone was a cold, scheming woman who had hidden a fortune for years just to trap a good man, then humiliated him in public for her own sport. And people believed her. Some of them still do. There are folks in that bloodline to this very day who will tell you with a straight face that Andre was the one who got wronged. That lie never got its wall of glass. It never got its reveal, its front row seat, its moment of justice. It just settled into the corners of a family and stayed there. Simone knew it was out in the world saying her name wrong, and she made the choice not to chase it, because you cannot draft a document that forces a proud woman to tell the truth. Some injustices you just have to carry. So Simone walked away with the company and with her name in the light at last, and with a sister she never expected to keep. And she walked away without the family she thought she'd married into. Without the comfortable lie that being good is enough to make people choose you. Without the soft place inside her that this whole night had cost. She was standing at the end of it. She was not untouched. Anyone who says the strong ones walk away clean has never once stood close enough to watch one actually do it. She went back south, back to the small town, back to the streets that go quiet after 7, back to the sky that does most of the talking. The old feed store that had been her father's print shop was still standing out on the edge of town, boarded up and leaning, holding 30 years of dried ink in its walls. Simone bought it back. She did not turn it into some monument to herself, some plaque with her name on it. She cleaned it out with her own hands. She put light back through the windows. And she opened its doors as a place where the town's young people could come and learn a real trade the way she'd once learned one. Quiet daytime hours, honest skills, a machine to put their hands on, no cost at all to the ones whose families couldn't pay. There was a boy who came in the first week, 14, all elbows and attitude, who'd been getting into trouble for want of anywhere else to be. She put him at the old press and watched his whole face change when the first clean page came off it. She signed the deed for the shop at the old front counter in her father's ink. And this time the ink did exactly what he'd promised her it was for, all those years ago in the register light. It carried people. It stood behind them. It lifted instead of ended. Cheryl drove down on a Saturday and helped her stack fresh paper in the back, and the two of them didn't talk much, and that was all right. The door stayed open for her. The door stayed open for anybody. Here is the last thing, and then I'll let you go. Your worth was never sitting in that bright room waiting on their applause to make it real. The people who work the hardest to make you feel small are almost always standing on ground that you laid for them, praying every day that you never look down and notice whose ground it is. Simone looked down. In the end, that was all it ever took. On the front counter of the little shop where the afternoon light comes in clean now, her father's black pen rests capped beside the register. It catches the sun. It is worth more than the whole glass tower up in Atlanta, worth more than every check it ever signed, and the quiet woman who carries it has finally, after all this time, come to believe that too. She never once raised her voice. She raised the truth instead, and let it stand. If this story reached something in you tonight, follow now so the next one finds you when it comes, and tell me down below, should she have signed that letter with her own hand, or made him stand there and watch someone else do it? I'm reading every single answer.